Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden says Washington has deep concerns about China's newly declared air defense zone over the East China Sea. Biden is due in Seoul later today for talks on the issue with President Park Geun-hye. Korea's gross national income climbed at its slowest pace in a year and a half in the third quarter, edging up a paltry 0.2% from a quarter earlier, mostly due to the nation's worsened trade conditions. Plus, Korea continues to be under the influence of fine dust particles from China. The concentration of particles hit nearly 300 micrograms per cubic meter in some parts of the country, and that's more than 10 times the level recommended by the World Health Organization. These stories and more coming up on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Good to have you with us. You're watching Newsline at noon on Thursday, December 5th. I'm Kim Hyun-ji in Seoul.
And I'm Mark Broom. Thanks ever so much for joining us. We start with the bubbling tensions in East Asia over China's new airspace policy. US Vice President Joe Biden has conveyed to Chinese President Xi Jinping Washington's concerns about Beijing's recent establishment of an air defense zone in the East China Sea.
Biden is due in Seoul later today, where he will discuss Beijing's new air zone with Korean leaders. Arirang has our top story.
Vice President Biden told Chinese President Xi Jinping that the United States is concerned over China's newly declared air zone. U.S. officials say Biden told Xi that the United States does not recognize the zone, which involves islands that have been at the center of dispute between China and Japan. President Xi argued that the islands known as Diaoyu in China and Senkaku in Japan have long been Chinese territory. The two also discussed North Korean issues, especially the apparent purging of Pyongyang's second-in-command Chang Song-taek and how that will affect security on the Korean peninsula. Emerging from a closed-door meeting, the two leaders didn't offer details about their talks, only emphasizing the importance of cooperation amid the tumultuous political climate.
You are candid and you are constructive in developing this new relationship. Both qualities are sorely needed.
We stand ready to work together with the U.S. side to appropriately handle sensitive issues and differences between us, so that together we can make sure our bilateral relationship will continue to move forward in a sustained, healthy and stable way.
A similar set of regional issues are to top the agenda during Biden's meeting with President Park Geun-hye when he arrives in Seoul late Thursday afternoon. Biden has expressed hope that Korea and Japan resolve disputes over wartime history and territorial issues. In a written interview with the Korean daily Choson-ilbo, however, Biden made clear that Washington won't act as a mediator over the issue. Yurian, Arirang News.
In what's being seen as a drive by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to bolster Japan's defense posture, the country has launched a U.S.-style National Security Council. The council, headed by Abe and attended by 3 other foreign and defense ministers, met for the first time on Wednesday, where they discussed how to cope with China's declaration of its new air zone, as well as the reported dismissal of North Korea's second-in-command, Chang Song-taek. While little is known about the whereabouts of Chang, Japanese broadcaster TBS, citing a radio station run by North Korean defectors in South Korea, reported that Chang was detained by the country's military last Saturday. Turning now to South Korea's response to the apparent ousting of Chang Song-taek. While attention is shifting to what happens now, Seoul is preparing for possible provocations out of North Korea. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
As soon as reports surfaced of Chang Sung-taek's ousting, the South Korean government began preparing against possible provocations by North Korea. At a meeting of top military commanders on Wednesday, Defense Minister Kim Kwan-jin noted the possibility of increased instability in North Korea following the political shakeup and warned that this could lead to provocations targeting the South. The top military commander ordered South Korean troops to maintain a level of high vigilance. In the past, Pyongyang has escalated inter-Korean tensions as a means of maintaining internal unity. If that's the case this time around, a fourth nuclear test or missile launch could be in the cards. On Tuesday, Seoul's National Intelligence Service said Chang had been purged and 2 of his close confidants executed. As North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, Chang practically served as the guardian of the young and inexperienced dictator and was known as the power behind the throne, while holding multiple high-ranking positions. While the ousting has not been officially confirmed, South Korean Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae told lawmakers Wednesday that Chang had most likely been removed from his posts, pointing to an internal power struggle as one of the key reasons. The minister, however, said that Chang and his wife Kim Kyung-hee appear to be safe. Experts see Chang's dismissal as the last phase of the young leader's power consolidation, saying that Kim has removed all of the old guard that had been close to his father and is now solidifying his own inner group. They say a complete removal of Chang and his aides may carry North Korea further away from successful economic reform, one of Kim's key policy goals, since Chang is more aware of market forces than his nephew. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The Korean government is reportedly seeking to buy 14 Chinook multi-mission transport helicopters from the United States. The U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency notified Congress this week that it is planning to sell Korea the helicopters, along with the engines, air navigation systems, and radar altimeters, through the Defense Department's Foreign Military Sales Program. The $150 million package also offers training and logistical support. The agency said the choppers will help Korea improve its homeland defense and deter regional threats. Chinook helicopters are currently operated by the U.S. Forces Korea.
Panama says it will release all of the North Korean sailors who are aboard a seized North Korean ship if the communist state pays the dues. Panamanian Foreign Minister Nunes Fabregat said the 35 sailors will be free to go once North Korea pays $670,000 in fines. He was speaking in an interview with Korea's Yonhap news agency in Panama City on Wednesday local time. The vessel, the Chongchonggang, has been held in Panama since July after it was caught smuggling military weapons and equipment from Cuba. This is the first time a high-ranking Panamanian official has said all 35 of the North Korean sailors would be released. Earlier, Panamanian prosecutors said 3 of the crew members, including the captain, would have to face charges of arms trafficking. Korea's gross national income climbed at its slowest pace in 18 months in the third quarter, despite the economy's fastest expansion nearly 2 years over the same period. So, with these mixed signals, can we still assume the Korean economy is on the recovery track? Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Korea's gross national income, which is a gauge of the population's purchasing power, rose a mere 0.2% in the third quarter from a quarter earlier, the slowest pace of expansion in 18 months. This slower growth comes despite the nation's economy expanding at its fastest pace in nearly 2 years, growing 3.3% in the July to September period from a year earlier. The Bank of Korea partly blames the low income growth on the so-called base effect stemming from the recent gain in Korea's gross national income that has been speeding up over the last 2 quarters. The central bank added that the Korean economy is showing signs of recovery, but at a feeble pace.
Overall, third quarter growth comes from domestic demand, especially from the rise in investments in construction and private spending.
The Korean economy also expanded 1.1% in the third quarter from a quarter earlier when it gained at the same pace. The economy's quarter-on-quarter growth remained below 1% for more than 2 years until early this year. Adding on to that cautious optimism, global investment banks say they expect the Korean economy to grow at a faster pace next year compared to this year. Bloomberg data shows forecasts from 17 major financial institutions points to Korea's GDP growing over 3.5% next year from the 2.7% estimated for 2013. The forecast is in line with an overall rosy outlook for the United States and Europe. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea is marking its 50th Trade Day on this Thursday. Marking the day, President Park Geun-hye renewed her government's trade goal of becoming one of the top 5 trading nations in the world by 2020. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju reports.
Despite its small geographical size and relatively recent modernization, Korea is now the world's 8th largest trading nation. The Trade Ministry is predicting that Korea will win a triple crown in trade this year, with $1 trillion in trade volume expected for the 3rd consecutive year, record exports and trade surplus. Marking Korea's 50th Trade Day on Thursday, President Park Geun-hye put forth her goal to make Korea one of the top 5 trading nations and for the country to post $2 trillion in trade by the year 2020. With these targets in mind, President Park says she will push ahead with 3 tasks: developing new export industries, boosting export capabilities of small and mid-sized firms, and strengthening her sales diplomacy and the foundation for free trade. New export industries will include the service sector, intermediate processing trade, and the convergence of service and IT.
전자정부 시스템과 지능형 교통 시스템, 플랜트 운영 보수와 디지털 병원 등 서비스와 IT를 결합한 복합 시스템 또한 우리 무역의 새로운 블루오션이 될 수 있습니다.
The president also pledged to actively support SMEs seeking more export opportunities, as the future of Korean trade depends on them.
내년 상반기까지 해외 34개국에 있는 우리 수출 지원 기관의 무역 정보를 연계 통합해서 실시간으로 제공하고 빠르고 편리한 스마트 통관 시스템을 구축해서 수출 전 과정에 걸쳐 맞춤형 컨설팅을 강화해 나갈 것입니다.
President Park promised to create a trading environment that is friendly to Korean companies by using diplomacy to open doors for further exchanges. In particular, she said the Korean government will lay the foundation to enter the Chinese market through a Korea-China FTA and stand up for the interest of Korean firms in upcoming talks for regional trade pacts like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills. Korea is being blanketed by a thick layer of fine dust particles from China. Experts are advising people to wear masks until the worst has blown over. Son Jang-in reports.
A cloud of smog and toxic dust have covered most of the nation since early this week, with average concentration levels that are 2 to 3 times higher than normal. On Wednesday, particulate dust levels in Seoul reached nearly 200 micrograms per cubic meter, nearly 4 times the amount observed on a normal day. That's well beyond the precautionary level of 120 micrograms per cubic meter set by the National Institute of Environmental Research. It's also more than 7 times the level recommended by the World Health Organization, which has a standard of 25 micrograms per cubic meter. In the southern industrial town of Pohang, dust levels reached nearly 300 micrograms per cubic meter on Wednesday, forcing the city to issue a preliminary dust warning for the first time this year. The dust contains toxic pollutants, including heavy metals and bacteria, and health experts advise wearing a mask with a dust filter and avoiding being outdoors at dawn when dust levels are at their peak. But there is good news on the horizon. Dust concentration levels are expected to decline gradually starting Thursday.
The concentration may be high in the morning in Seoul and Chungcheongdo because of the fine particle pollution coming from China, but the daily average is expected to return to normal today.
Meanwhile, foggy conditions are expected throughout the day under cloudy conditions. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
The cleanup operation at the troubled Fukushima nuclear power plant appears to be better under control than before. A team from the International Atomic Energy Agency that has been surveying the site since last week praised Japan for making progress in decommissioning the plant. The IAEA team told reporters on Wednesday that the two biggest improvements were made in the removal of nuclear fuel from reactor 4 and better management of the contaminated water at the site. However, they added that significant challenges remain, including the question of what should be done with the huge amount of radioactive water still stored in the facility. The team says the water needs to be decontaminated and released into the sea, which will not be easy due to strong local resistance and safety issues. Anti-government protests in Ukraine are now into week 2 as protesters continue to demand the president step down over his recent decision to reject a trade pact with the European Union. 3 former presidents have come forward saying they support the mass protests. Kim Min-ji reports.
3 former Ukrainian presidents have voiced their support for the ongoing mass anti-government protests. In a statement Wednesday, Leonid Kravchuk, Leonid Krochma, and Viktor Yushchenko expressed solidarity with the peaceful civic actions of the protesters. They condemned the excessive use of police force and urged the government and opposition leaders to engage in dialogue. The protests, now in their second week, were sparked by the government's last-minute decision to suspend plans to sign an integration pact with the European Union. The opposition says the U-turn was a result of Russian pressure. Tens of thousands of protesters remain at the Independence Square in Kiev and continue to block the main government building. The protesters want President Viktor Yanukovych and his cabinet to resign. However, the government on Tuesday survived a no-confidence vote in parliament. The protests were relatively peaceful until clashes broke out over the weekend when police used tear gas and stun grenades to keep protesters away from the presidential building. Police also beat protesters with batons. NATO has condemned the use of excessive force against protesters and urged all parties to refrain from further clashes. Russia is urging the West to stay out of Ukraine's internal affairs and also called for stability and order as the protests intensify. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said Moscow was keeping a close eye on the events in Ukraine. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
8 major banks have been fined a record $2.3 billion by the EU for colluding to rig interest rates. The European Commission said Wednesday that it was shocking that competing banks formed illegal cartels to fix interbank lending rates, known as LIBOR and Euribor. Those rates are used to set the price of financial products, including mortgages. Deutsche Bank will pay the heaviest fine of $985 million, Societe Generale over $600 million, and RBS $550 million. Barclays and UBS were excused their fines as they alerted the authorities to the existence of the cartels. The sanctions, the first in Europe for rate manipulation, are also the highest ever dished out for European antitrust enforcement.
The driver of the train that derailed in New York City last weekend, killing 4 people, has told federal investigators that he zoned out shortly before the crash. The drivers' labor union says William Rockefeller only realized that he'd nodded off 5 seconds before the train came off the tracks. The 7-car train was by then already traveling at 3 times the speed limit in the curved section of the track where the crash happened. The National Transportation Safety Board says its investigations are still ongoing and it will be weeks, if not months, before they discover the exact cause of Sunday's crash. Now, some disappointing news for Korean racing fans. Korea has failed to make the cut for the 2014 Formula One season. 3 Grand Prix, Korea, Mexico and New Jersey in the United States, had been included on a provisional calendar issued by the FIA in September, which proposed a record 22 races, but all 3 were dropped from the subsequent draft list. F1 watchers say Korea's failure to feature on the final list after 4 years is probably due to the financial difficulties at the remote Yeongnam circuit in Korea's southwestern Jeollanam-do. In culture news, the Korean National Opera is reprising its sold-out production of Puccini's timeless love story La Boheme in Seoul this week. The opera is one of Puccini's most celebrated masterpieces. Set in 19th century Paris, La Boheme tells the story of a group of young artists, their lives, their loves and their dreams. Its colourful orchestration and poetic arias are being brought together under the direction of conductor Song Ki-sun and famed Italian producer Marco Gandini, both of whom have previously collaborated with the National Opera on other productions. The opera company's production of La Boheme last year, presented to celebrate its 50th anniversary, was a sellout. This year's production runs from Thursday through Sunday at the Seoul Arts Centre. Social ventures, or businesses that devote themselves to helping society, are a relatively new concept here in Korea, but they are steadily catching on. There are around 1,000 of these companies in Korea now, and the number is steadily climbing. Kwon So-ah tells us what some of these social ventures do.
The pursuit of profits is not the main focus of social ventures. Their aim is to contribute to society by providing people in need with services or jobs. This small enterprise based in Seoul makes creative hangers with the help of 50 employees who are homeless people.
Contrary to our biases, these people have a strong will to support themselves. While thinking about how to help them, we came up with the idea of starting a business to provide them with jobs.
This business gives back to society in a different way. These may look like ordinary flower print products, but they contain stories of Korean comfort women, victims of sexual slavery during Japan's colonial rule of the Korean peninsula. The flower cushions and cell phone cases are born of pressed flowers and are made by former comfort women Shim Da-ryun and Kim Su-nak during psychological therapy. The company plans to donate 70% of its net profits toward the construction of a comfort women history museum.
We never want people to forget the story of the comfort women. We also want to inform people about their stories who don't know much about them.
To boost the trend in social ventures, the Korean government supports startups that are in their early stages with up to $28,000 for management and equipment costs. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Well, it feels mild today, but it's also another very smoggy day here in Seoul. Let's now get an update on the weather with our Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Good afternoon, Ji-hyun.
Well, good afternoon, guys. Now, as Yeonji just said, it's very hazy out there today. But with the blanket of toxic dust covering up the peninsula, there are some products that are selling like hotcakes.
Well, Jian, it's been a while since you gave me a quiz, but I'm guessing
Right.
It's probably face mask, right?
Absolutely, face mask is right for because this month it increased about 10% from last year, and hand sanitizer, air cleaner, and mint-flavored candies are also hot sellers. And it will be a good idea to use those items today and stay indoors, even if it's as mild as yesterday, as the toxic smoke from China will continue to cover up the nation today. So please take good care of yourself. Well, it's been a while since we've seen the sun, and things doesn't look too different this afternoon. We're looking at a mix of haze, dust and smoke over the peninsula. And tomorrow we will see the cold weather start to return, but that's a good thing because it will push a lot of the dust particles away. But we will have a warm stretch for a few days in the afternoon, but the morning lows will drop down into the negative again here in the Seoul metro area, and we're expecting another cold snap next week. But with that in mind, here are the readings for this afternoon. So we'll see a high of 9 this afternoon. Daegu and Gwangju will get get up to 12 and Busan will hit 15. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju will enjoy a mild day with a high of 16 this afternoon. Daejeon and Dokdo will get up to 11 and 12, while Mount Kumgang stays chilly side at 1. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me today, and back to you guys in the studio.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour. Thanks for watching.
Don't change the channel. We'll have more news coming up at 2 p.m. Korea time.